Yes?
It's always kind of, I never know where to start because audiences are so varied in their knowledge. But so there's a couple things I thought I might start by telling you tonight, just to sort of set the tone. I don't know how many of you saw the media didn't cover this very well. Bill Leaders covered this in the Isthmus when it was 2 or 3 issues ago. Let me start. This is a 2002 special issue of Scientific American. They now have a regular publication on the mind, but this was before it became a regular publication. And it was just a special issue. And in here, I was living in Santa Barbara at the time. I'll talk to you about how I got involved in this, but at this time, 2002, I read this article in here. It was written by a researcher who I knew by name at the time already. It was called The Neurobiology of Fear. It was written by Ned Kalin. Ned Kalin is the chair of the Department of Psychiatry here at the University of Wisconsin campus. So it's the typical stuff, and I'm reading through this, and he's talking about the monkeys that they've discovered that are more fearful than others. They can do brain scans on them and find out that there's a particular subset of rhesus macaques that are susceptible to anxiety. And so he started doing studies on infant monkeys, pulling them away from their mothers and then putting them in various situations and trying to figure out what situations they were the most fearful in. And he videotaped those sessions with those baby monkeys. Speak up. And so I wrote in 2002, I wrote to the university under the Wisconsin Open Records Act and asked for a copy of those videotapes that he had cited in his research. They ignored my request. I wrote a couple times and they ignored my requests. And then in, it was about 2004 or 2000, it was about 2004, 2005, maybe 2004. Kalin published another paper with another psychiatrist at the University of Wisconsin named Ruth Benka. Ruth Benka's work and Kalin's work looked at monkeys of this same subgroup of monkeys that were particularly anxious. They lesioned parts of their brains. They did these surgeries where they found the amygdala on them and then injected little bits of acid into the emotion centers of their brains. Put them into these various situations to see how they would be frightened. And then near the end of the study, Ruth Benka strapped these monkeys into chairs and videotaped them overnight. This is according to her publications. And then they killed them the next day and sectioned their brains. But that's neither here nor there. Right now, the important thing here was that they videotaped their experiments. So a friend of mine wrote an open records request for those videotapes. That request was denied. So then we got a local lawyer involved, and we redid the request, this time on legal letterhead, and it came back a little bit more formal of a denial for videotapes. And then we got one of the local papers, we got Bill Leaders to ask. So just this year, he submitted an open records request for those same sets of videotapes. And this time we got a more, of course, papers asking for copies of those tapes, and we got a more sort of fleeced out answer from the university attorneys. Their answer was that it was in the greater public interest was served by not allowing the public to see those videotapes. Wisconsin open record statutes require that whenever a request for documents is denied, that they have to hold on to those documents for 60 days, pending appeals and all these sorts of things. 63 days after our last denial, the university destroyed 60 boxes of videotapes showing experiments on monkeys at the university. The only place this story was covered was in the Isthmus. They destroyed 60 boxes of video. We had asked for what we thought were 2 videotapes. And come to find out, we'll never know what was on those tapes, of course. But shortly, I think that there's going to be on one of the local TV stations, I think Ann will get something run that actually depicts some recent undercover video, not from the Wisconsin Primate Center, but from a lab in Israel that we think is probably fairly indicative of what's going on all around the world. So it's interesting. when you hear them talk about how open their research is and about all of those sorts of things, keep in mind that in fact, rather than let the public find out what was really going on in the labs, this goes to the heart of something else I always say, is that activists, people that are concerned about animals, are anti-science. Now the videotapes that you would take during an experiment on a monkey would be the most primary data that you have. You make those videotapes, as this article does, and Bankus papers, and they interpret the videos that they saw. So those videotapes are the most primary data. You would expect that sometime in the future, another researcher might look at their paper and say, my research is different. I'd really like to see those videotapes and see what inferences they were drawing. Now that basic research, that fundamental collection of data has been destroyed rather than let you find out what they were doing in the labs. Okay, so that sets the tone. That's what's happening today, right now. They don't want you to know what's going on in the labs. It's just a matter of fact that they don't want you to know. So, this is a friend of mine named Pepe. Pepe was a chimpanzee. I knew him in Cameroon in West Africa. And a friend of mine, a veterinarian, was visiting there and met 3 chimpanzees who were in cages behind a hotel. And these 3 chimpanzees, Pepe, Becky, and Jackie, were in fairly small cages, and they were side by side. And so the chimpanzee in the middle could reach out to touch this chimpanzee, and the chimpanzee and the one on the other side, but the 2 on the end could touch each other. And they were in those cages for about, somewhere in the neighborhood of between 20 and 30 years. People at the hotel would come out, give them cigarettes, give them drinks, and that's where they lived. Sherry found out, my friend, found out that this was going on, and she was alarmed, and at that point made a decision that she was going to leave the United States, move to Africa full-time, because she had learned that in fact this was going on all over the area. And she started a sanctuary there, and now there must be 200 chimpanzees that are sanctuary. I've had the pleasure of being there twice, and I'll talk about this later, that have been eaten up by baby chimpanzees that are pounding all over you. It's pretty interesting. The story though about Pepe, she moved them, when they first moved them out to the sanctuary, they were in a cage that was about, they moved from these very small cages to a single cage that was about the size of maybe 3/4 of this room, and about this high. They eventually had put now electric fences around like 40-acre plots where these chimpanzee groups are now living. But these chimpanzees who had seen each other for 20, 30 years and really had never been able to touch very much, as soon as they put them in the cage together, they just all ran together and clung to each other and were just beside themselves for the first time to be actually able to groom each other and be together. It was pretty impressive. Pepe, they say you're not supposed to touch adult chimpanzees. You should keep your distance because they're very strong and very volatile emotions. The truth is that if you're very careful and you really pay attention to what their mood is that you actually can, of course, interact. I would walk into this cage where they were early on and sit down with my face against the bar. And Pepe would come and sit down with his face against the bar, right against mine. And we'd reach in and groom each other. He'd turn me around, lift up my shirt. I'd turn him around and look in all of his hair and everything. He'd look in my beard. One time he grabs my head like this. And he's looking in my eyes. And I'm thinking, oh, Pepe, he's fine. Other times, of course, if he's in one of his moods, you want to be really back because boy, their emotions are so hard. Yeah. When I was in Cameroon, this was a small monkey, it's a putty-nosed winnet whose mother was captured, killed, and eaten. And then Sherry found this baby in one of the villages, rescued him. And the last time I was there for about a month and a half, and I became essentially his nursemaid. He started sleeping in bed with me. I was worried at first. I didn't know. You have a baby monkey in bed with you, maybe you're going to have pee and poop all over the bed. And there was never an issue at all. I'd get up and have to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night. I'd get up. He'd be on me, of course, really clean. And I'd go outside and he'd pee too, and we'd go back to bed. Apparently, this is Rochelle, the woman on the right, is one of the people that worked at the chimpanzee sanctuary. I have many stories I can tell about monkeys and chimpanzees there. But really what this brings us to is, my claim here is that there's about 100 years of research now, easily 100 years of research, that points out what I believe are ethically important similarities between the minds and emotions of monkeys, chimpanzees, children, and adult humans. And I'm going to talk to you about some of those similarities tonight and talk to you about some of the things that are going on at the university and why those things should matter to us. I'm going to go through time here a little bit and I'll bring you up until today's research. But as long ago as 1925, this guy named Wolfgang Kohler was doing these experiments, these early experiments with chimpanzees at the time. He was, this was in Tenerife, by the way, and he had a fairly large enclosure. He was doing these sort of intelligence tests on them. He would hang food up way over their heads and noticed for the first time that somebody wrote about this that given the opportunity, chimpanzees would bring boxes to the center underneath the food, stack them up, and climb up the boxes to reach the food. Or he could give them poles, and they would fashion the poles together, different sizes, jam them into each other, and reach up with those poles to knock the food down. And that led him to believe that chimpanzees have an intelligence of the same sort of type as humans seem to have. Gene Goodall cites Wolfgang Kohler's work as formative and firm understanding of chimpanzees and what she believes is important stuff. Just another picture from a chimpanzee sanctuary in Cameroon, actually it's not in Cameroon. All over Africa, we're killing adult chimpanzees and gorillas, eating them, shipping them to the market, and that leaves all these babies who end up in the pet trade. These are chimpanzee babies that have been rescued, and for whatever reason, it seems that chimpanzees like to paint. Online, you can actually go and see some of these pictures that have been painted. They're all non-representational, of course, and apparently they like to taste the paint as well. In '58, Harlowe was discovering that, in fact, infant monkeys and infant people seem to develop along using the same sort of benchmarks in development. That they, this is a statement of his, one of his speeches that he gave early on, 58. The developmental sequences seem to run in parallel, even though they're developing more rapidly. A 6-month-old baby, a 6-month-old monkey is much more developed and advanced than a 6-month-old baby human. But the things that their developmental benchmarks seem to go in the same order. Harlowe's work, of course, this is probably how many of you remember Harlowe or have seen these pictures in your old psychology books or something. And this is the picture of Harlowe that the university usually wants to promote. And they talk often about, well, this sort of work was controversial, and Deborah Bloom wrote a book about Harlowe not too long ago talking about his maternal deprivation studies. And certainly the studies that stemmed from these, including these as well, but the studies that stemmed from these in particular, the very long isolation studies. Stephen Suomi was involved in one of his graduate students where they kept them isolated for months and months, sometimes years on end. Were absolutely horrible. Now, they don't talk about that very much, and they also don't talk about Harlowe's earlier work. This is an aside as I'm going through time. We're 1958. This is a quick aside here. This is, of course, as I said, this is what you tend to remember when they talk about Harlowe. What they don't talk about was before Harlowe started doing his maternal deprivation studies, he was also starting to do experimental brain ablations, where he would do these surgeries on monkeys, destroy parts of their brains. Then he started looking at the effects of full body irradiation. In many of these, what he did was he developed a series of tests that he could use to test intelligence. And so he would either damage their brains and then give them the intelligence tests again and see what those sort of different areas of their brain that he cut away, what that did to them. In some cases like this, he put them on this spinning pedestal where he's giving them these large full body doses of their radiation and then watching as they continuing to test their ability to solve these intelligence tests as they slowly died from radiation poisoning. The university doesn't talk about these things. This is who then went into doing maternal deprivation studies. And they only want to talk about, they usually will only talk about the term. In 1964, moving up, we started with Kohler. We looked at what Harlowe said, and now Jules Masterman. Jules Masterman, this is a very important study. Jules Masterman, at the time that he did this, he was the president of the American Psychiatry, or American Society of Psychiatry, or something. He was the best known psychiatrist in the world. He was also the chair of the International Association of Psychiatry. I may be getting the name slightly off. Masterman did. Masterman, this paper is only about a page and a half long. But basically, this is what he did. He built a box that had two compartments in it. And the monkeys, there was going to be a monkey in each side of the box. He taught the monkeys that if they pulled chains that were hanging in the box in a certain order based on lights that flashed inside, that they'd receive a food pellet. Once they learned how to do that, he put a monkey on one side of the box, a monkey on the other side, and now the monkey that could pull the chains to get the food pellet, when he did that, the monkey on the other side of the box received an electric shock. And so what he discovered was that as soon as the monkeys realized that by pulling the chains, that they shocked the monkey in the next box, they quit pulling the chains. Many of them refused to pull the chains after they learned how. In one case, one of the monkeys went without eating, according to his study, for 12 days. Didn't eat for 12 days rather than shock the monkey in the next box. Now, to me, when I read those sorts of things, they have ethical implications. It seems to me as if the monkeys are operating as if they understand the golden rule. What he found was that the monkeys that had been in the shocked side of the box were even quicker learners and less likely to pull the chains to shock the monkey on the other side. It didn't seem to make any difference whether the monkey on one side or the other had been dominant to the other one, whether they knew the monkey. Anything that he could figure out, it didn't seem to matter very much. The key here was as soon as the monkey learned that by pulling the chain to hurt the monkey next to him, he quit. Everybody that uses monkeys should know these studies, so they understand the animals that they're using when they come to the lab to start working with them. 2000, Thomas Burbacker and Kimberly Grant are senior researchers at the University of Washington in Seattle. Washington is one of the sister facilities of the Wisconsin National Primate Research Center. The Washington National Primate Research Center has its facility in Seattle, and it has its facilities overseas as well. They have a large facility in Indonesia. They have one of the largest holdings of monkeys in the world. Kimberly Grant and Thomas Burbacker are toxicologists, and they think that the fact that we have monkeys share important and advanced behavioral similarities to us, that their cognitive abilities and their binding social relationships, they think that makes them great models for toxicology studies. In other words, they inject them with chemicals, or they put chemicals down their throats, and they study why those chemicals kill them. This same monkey that's here. This is not a monkey in the United States. This is one of the monkeys that was at Shamrock Farms in England. But I think that the depression on this animal's body, his body language seems to me to speak an awfully large amount about what they are experiencing in the lab. So this brings me to my thesis. It's my claim that, I have to, there's an aside. I'm ahead of time. All right. Let me tell you first, I was a school teacher. I was a special education school teacher. I was a reading specialist. I've been a Peace Corps volunteer. I volunteered in my own communities. I started recycling programs. I taught adult literacy in my community. I like people. I always have. I like working with kids. And so when I hear that people are doing all these really horrific things to animals in the labs, I wonder, what is it that makes people special? Why would they think that they should do these things to people but not to animals? So I came up with a list. What is it that I think makes us special? And this is my list. I had a different list. But I think these are pretty good. Pretty makes us pretty special. We fall in love. defend our loved ones with our lives, we make friends, we laugh, we're curious and creative. So I think that's what makes us special. But then I kind of wonder, what about monkeys and apes? And I can't find many differences. The monkeys and apes that I've read about and have known seem to be a little different from us. You know, gorillas, when people try to go and capture gorillas, or the poachers want to take their babies for the pet trade, they often have to kill many gorillas in the group because the gorillas will defend each other to the death. Gorillas are getting shot and killed, and they continue to charge. They continue to try to defend the other gorillas that are hurt and laying on the ground. It's amazing. And they certainly breed, we know that. Jay Goodall's talked about one of the chimpanzees had Dombey that after his mother died, that he quit eating, he started moving around, and they eventually found him curled up in the fetal position and had died near her where she had last died or something like that. He certainly breed himself to that. And if you've been around monkeys and chimpanzees, you know that they certainly interact with each other as if they care about each other and they recognize that they're individuals. I love this. When I was in Cameroon, one of the things I did was I slept in the chimpanzee nursery. And the chimpanzees, maybe just a little bit younger than this, but actually just about that age. And they were in a fairly large electric fence going around them so they couldn't get out. And the whole thing was probably maybe 3 times the size of this whole building, maybe even larger, some trees in it and stuff. And in the morning when I got up, I fixed formula for them. They were drinking out of cups by this time. And I'd go out and I'd hand this around to everybody. I think there were like 8 baby chimpanzees at the time. And then I'd hang out with them for the rest of the morning until I had to go start doing chores and stuff. I was doing construction work with my friend. And you learn pretty fast that you don't want to sit out in the open because your back's sort of unguarded. And these guys they'll just come and clobber you and jump all over you and they're wild animals. And so I'm sitting with my back very close to the electric fence. And they're playing and hanging around and jumping on me. Sometimes they're running off. And I'm leaned up against this fence. And I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of volts, but it's just an amazing zap. Boy, it just shocked me. You know, and I jerk back, and immediately all of them come over, and they're like, it's okay, you know. We've had that experience too. I get over it. And they were very concerned, and they seemed to understand immediately what had happened to me. Anyway, just that. This is chimpanzee Nama, and this is another chimpanzee from Sanctuary. She really liked, I don't know why, but she really, Nama, when I first met Nama, she was on a chain about this long. Had been around her neck for about 20 years. The iron pipe was driven into the ground, and there was just a circle of bare ground where she had been, and again at another hotel in Cameroon. But she absolutely loved to tie and untie shoes. So this is her design. This is my wife's foot, and Nama's design of relacing her shoe. She would do this over and over and over. Anyway, monkeys and chimpanzees are under attack. Well, I skipped something here, but this really is the situation. We're breeding them. We know they're an awful lot like us. We're experimenting on them. We're putting them in circuses. We're feeding them. We're selling their babies in pet trade. There's only one species that works. It's not replication. Let me see my whole section here. Oh, I don't know. I don't think I should, but we'll see what happens. It's the similarities between us that, of course, have led to this point in time. Everybody recognizes this. The people that research on them, that use them in the circuses, that put them in the labs, they all make the claims. As we saw before with Bogle and Grant, with Harlowe, everybody points out the similarities between us and them, and they exploit those similarities. This is what I was hoping to get to, and I had forgotten these earlier slides. I do this all the time. I think I wouldn't forget it. This is that primate experimentation has resulted in widespread, institutionalized, industrialized, and routine evil. It's a pretty strong statement. It's a statement about the entire industry. but I think it's true. And this is why I think that. Let me define first, this is what I say is evil. That it's the causing injury, pain, or misery. And that's what's become institutionalized, industrialized, routine, and everything. How widespread is it? You'll notice that this is from 2002 up above. I haven't updated this since that time. The numbers actually, you see Wisconsin, it says 3,700. We think that's now about 4,500. There's about 2,500 monkeys out at Covance, out by the airport, and there's another 2,000 monkeys here on the University of Wisconsin campus in the Harlowe lab and the Primate Center. To show you how much these numbers have changed, you see there I have Louisiana has 2,700. In fact, there's 2 labs there. There's New Iberia that has about 5,000 monkeys today, and Tulane that has about another 5,000 monkeys there. So just 2002, the industry is growing leaps and bounds. And they're saying in all of their literature from the NIH that all of the studies, they say we need more monkeys. We want to expand. The Primate Center here is hoping to expand. All of the primate centers around the United States are under major expansion as we speak.
The ones in Louisiana weren't affected by Katrina then?
Unfortunately, no. I say unfortunately because I had big hopes. When I saw this was coming, I thought that it would rip many of these places, because they're in the south, they have these very large outdoor areas where they're doing a lot of breeding. And a lot of them are in corn crib cages, these round sorts of things with a sort of a cone top. And I thought, okay, the wind's going to come through, blow the tops off. And actually in that area, southern Louisiana, some of the monkeys that have escaped there, they've never recovered. And it's just because it's so wild in so many of the swamps that actually there probably are, to this day, there probably are a few feral monkeys in Louisiana that have escaped from those places. Unfortunately, though, as you looked at the swath, it looks like it did, well, it bypassed them. So that was, in my way of thinking, it was unfortunate. Anyway, it's growing. So it's very widespread. Every large university in the United States essentially has primates in their labs. I don't know of any large university that doesn't. So it's everywhere. It's everywhere.
So Madison is not the only place in Wisconsin. And you can presume that they're in Milwaukee.
That's right. That's right. Now in Milwaukee there won't be a huge population. Yeah, but they're everywhere. Yeah.
I also want to point out those figures are actually only the ones that are used in research and does not include breeding. Primates that are bred, used for breeding purposes.
So in what ways has it become institutionalized? My claim is that the entire industry of primate experimentation has in fact become part of the institution of government. Not too long ago, the National Primate Research Centers were called Regional Primate Research Centers. Now they've been renamed National Primate Research Centers. Now they're part of the National Institutes of Health in the same sense that the National Cancer Institute is, or the National Eye Institute, or there's about 27 different institutes that make up the NIH. The primate centers used to be regional resources. Now they're actually part of the entire NIH itself. It is an institution. The industry has become an institution within our government in and of itself. In what ways has it become industrialized? Well, this is where we see that my technology works. I have a video that I'm going to show you, and I hope that my speaker actually is going to, if I haven't plugged into the right thing, I have it turned on high. This is a video from a company that makes cages for monkeys. This is big business. There's a lot, you can imagine, if you've got labs in every one of the universities, you have to have cages for the animals. You have to have water bottles. You have to have food. All of the stuff that's involved in running the industry you have to have. And so there's many companies that make this stuff. Now let me tell you, as we listen to this, listen very carefully to the first part. There was a law that was passed that said that we have to do something about the psychological enrichment for non-human primates in biomedical research laboratories in the United States. We have to not just let them go nuts without trying to do something about dealing with that. The truth is that they're chewing holes in their arms in the labs are doing all sorts of horrible things to themselves. They go insane over time. You can imagine being 20 or 30 years in a stainless steel box. So anyway, listen to how they're trying to sell this. I hope you can hear this. I hope the speaker works. Let's see if I can do this.
Our primate enrichment units include 4 compartments. Interchangeable partitions provide varying degrees of primate socialization, from complete isolation to full contact. Cages feature guillotine doors, and removable front panels provide easy access. Optional front swing panels open for animal care. Stainless steel floor pan cassettes are removable for cleaning, and by removing the floor panels, cages expand vertically. The ratcheting squeeze-back device glides easily on roller bearings to immobilize the animals safely, and its 2 large diameter tubes also provide a comfortable perch. Removable slide panels are configured with dual locks for added security. At your choice, cages can be mounted and locked to rail supports anchored to a wall. A foraging board offers fundamental enrichment, toys, food, and snacks. Either solid, transparent, or wire mesh partition panels offer enhanced opportunities for animal interaction. Wall-mounted or free-rolling, primate cages are available in a variety of rack configurations and sizes to satisfy your animal housing
There's so
needs.
many of these things. They're sending these things out all the time to labs around the country saying, buy our products. Our stuff's better than anybody else's, you know. It also gives you an idea of exactly what the cages look like, about where are they spending their lives. So how does this become routine? I don't know of any laboratory research using non-human primates, and I've looked at so many protocols and studies from all over the United States. I have yet to find one that doesn't cause some sort of injury, some sort of psychological distress. The sheer fact that they're living in these cages for years on end is distressful in and of itself. As you read the protocols, what you find is that they're creating diseases, they're trying to create conditions, they're surgically modifying the animals, they're feeding them in ways that are going to, they think are going to cause some sort of injury or disease. I don't know if any, even in the psychological things where they're doing these, they'll put monkeys into chairs and show them pictures and then see how they're reacting. That usually entails some sort of electrodes in their brains. And just on and on and on. So I believe that it's routine. I believe it's summary. I don't know if any just said that. In our previous presentations, every month during the school year, we do a thing called Primate Vivisection A to Z. And we started with David Abbott because we're doing it alphabetically, and we moved on down the list. We eventually got to, way past that. And as we've looked at all of these studies, trying to understand them, trying to make sense of what it is that they do to the animals, try to really come to grips with that, we haven't found yet anything that seems to be very clearly beneficial to people, or any use of animals that isn't really hurting them pretty severely and eventually killing them. Just quickly, David Abbott, he's one of the people that's been there for an awfully long time. He's discovered that, actually he's building on research that previous director of the Primate Center had discovered that if you inject pregnant monkeys who are carrying female fetuses, if you inject them with testosterone, that you can interfere with the development of the female fetus, and she's often born with deformed genitalia and a variety of other sorts of hormonal problems. And now, at the time that Golos was doing, it wasn't Golos, it was, who was it? It escapes me his name. I'll think of it in a second. His claim at the time was that it would be a model for studying homosexuality. That became sort of politically, improper to talk about that, but still, they found a way to use those monkeys that they could create. And now they claim that it's a model of something called polycystic ovarian syndrome. Apparently, nobody knows the cause of it. The Primate Center says that they've discovered the cause of PCOS. If you look at PCOS, and you go and look at the NIH websites, they say that nobody knows the cause of it yet. So there's controversy. I don't know, we went down, so we can go through the whole list. Davidson, Richard Davidson down there, the amygdala fear studies, he was a co-author with, I mentioned, Palin and also Bangkok, with the people that were doing the fear studies and the sleep deprivation studies and the scarring of the amygdalas. Robert Boyle was the name of the director who had discovered that you could create the forms and intelligence. We know that monkeys that are locked up for a long time will develop stereotypic behaviors. They'll do this looping, this endless spinning and pacing and over and over and over in their cages. I was involved in a situation in Oregon where we fought for about 2 years to get videos from the lab there, one of the sister facilities of the Wisconsin Primate Center called the Oregon National Primate Research Center. We learned that there were videos there. They were in court for about 2 years. As I say, we finally got the videos. The researcher there was Martha Miller. She said that the only thing that you're going to see in the videos are normally behaving monkeys. What we saw were normally behaving laboratory monkeys. And hours and hours of video of just monkeys that are just spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning just all day long because they've basically gone insane from being inside the cages for so long. We know that self-mutilation is epidemic. We know that from reading their own papers. I think about 10%, about 10% of the monkeys, especially male monkeys, are self-mutilating. Means that they're chewing holes in their forearms, they're biting off the ends of their tails, they're chewing the tips of their fingers off. We know this, and the primate centers are concerned about this because it requires veterinary intervention. It costs them money and time having to treat the animals that are doing these things to themselves. There's the diarrhea in the primate centers is chronic. You read the daily care logs. As somebody goes around from cage to cage every day and makes a little note on how the monkeys are doing, they'll often have a little note on there that says chronic diarrhea again, referred to the veterinarian. And you can read their life stories basically in these daily care logs, many of which we put online. And so they'll treat them with Pepto-Bismol or something like that for a period of time. The diarrhea will resolve. They'll take them off the medicine. The diarrhea comes back. In some cases, it becomes so severe that their anus is prolapse, require surgery to tie their anuses back inside their bodies. If they can't cure diarrhea in the monkeys that they have, how are they going to cure babies? I'm sorry? That's right. That's right. No, they don't talk about SIV and AIDS too. How are they going to cure it? You hear this all the time. You'll hear that, well, it's a necessary evil. If we don't do these things to animals, we won't find cures for human diseases. It's a common argument. There doesn't seem to be much data out there to support it. There's reams and reams of stories about and reports and published scientific data about the failures. There don't seem to be many instances of success. Most of the research that develops that turns into some sort of cure or treatment for humans is almost always based on doctors observing patients in hospitals, on post-market drug studies, looking at effects to drugs on people that they didn't know were going to be there, looking at epidemiology, looking at, we were able to, we had beagles and monkeys smoking cigarettes for decades and weren't able to get them cancer. People went, I wonder why everybody that's smoking is falling. That's how we discovered what's going on with tobacco and lung cancer. I made a little, I'm not going to say anything. This is sort of a chronology. I hope you can see this. What I tried to do is in a recent timeline of things that have been going on at the Primate Center. All of these were covered in the news. Just real quickly, the third one down. Well, the first one was actually my sort of first experience here with the University of Wisconsin. An acquaintance of mine came to the Alliance for Animals and said, I have information that the monkeys at the zoo are being used in research. And the director said, that can't be possible. University signed an agreement with the county, with Dane County, who owns the zoo, Henry Vinyl Zoo, that they wouldn't use the monkeys in any sort of invasive studies. They wouldn't harm them. And so she said, well, I have a few documents that say otherwise. So what we had was we had the serial numbers and the genders, the personal data on about 200 monkeys. And so we called right at that time, we made a call to the acting director, who is Joe Kimmons. Said, Joe, we hear that there's a monkey that's been used in research, was sold to another lab and used in the lab here or something, and was eventually killed in the research. He said, well, I don't think that could be true because we have an agreement. And he said, but let me do some research on that. So he calls us back a little bit later, and he says, you know, that monkey was an exceptional case. It had unique genetic characteristics that made it an absolute necessity for our research. Oh, okay, well, how about monkey 2496112? Well, I don't know. Well, let me check on that. So he comes back, calls back a little bit later and says, same thing. Well, how about monkey 49216? Or how about monkey R1749? And he says, well, how many of those do you have? I don't know, we have pages and pages and pages. So, at the end of the day, once all this became a public scandal, at the end of the day, they shipped those monkeys to Tulane, where they had been used, where they were used in infectious disease research, and probably all killed. Even though they had signed an agreement with the county, those monkeys would never be harmed. I'm sorry?
They come up and destroy the evidence.
Not only did they ship them off, to my conclusion would be to destroy the evidence. We went to Dane County. There was a resolution that was entered, and for about a year, we went to all of the subcommittees. Every committee we went to, the committee voted unanimously to find a way to support the monkeys here at Madison. We finally got to the entire Board of Supervisors, and the vote to support the monkeys was about, 80% on the monkey side. We won. University put on a song and dance every place we went. Said how much it was going to cost, how dangerous the monkeys were to the public, blah, 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 just on and on and on and on. And at the end of the day, they shipped them to Tulane because they still own them. And once they got rid of those two groups of monkeys, and we had said, no, there's a place that was willing to take them. And we even had the money to ship them out to this sanctuary in Texas. Oh no, that's a roadside zoo. We would never allow our monkeys to go to that roadside zoo. So they sent them to I can't talk. They sent them to Tulane, one of the sister facilities of the Wisconsin Primate Center, where they were all eventually killed. First, they broke up. These were two colonies of monkeys that had. One of them was the oldest continuously observed colony of rhesus macaques in the world. There was much research written about these monkeys. There are stories you can read about in Franz de Waal's Peacekeeping Among Primates. Lots of research had come out of those monkeys. They sent them to Tulane, isolated them, put them in they said quarantine for 90 days, broke up the groups, and then used them in the research. Then they were left over with a group of stump-tailed monkeys, and nobody wanted stump-tailed monkeys for research. So what were they going to do? They sent them to the roadside zoo. They said that they would never send the monkeys to. And then they bulldozed the monkey house. So now people that weren't here at that time and don't remember, you go to the zoo and there's no recollection of that. That building was put in place by Harlowe himself. I'm going to real quickly talk about Terrasama. It doesn't, in that 2004 thing right there, it really doesn't give you a good impression of what was happening. Terrasama was drilling holes in monkeys' head, putting this thing called a push-pull perfusion pump down into their head. She was pumping in these hormones into the deep part of their brain, and then sucking out the perfusate, the part that oozed through the brain back out through the other tube. And she was doing this on and on and on. The monkey that died, that the USDA found out about, the monkey that died was an elderly monkey. Now she said that she was studying puberty. But it was an elderly monkey who was strapped into this chair, equivalent of about a 90-year-old woman. While this monkey is having this pump this stuff in and out of her brain, the lab person that was supposed to be there observing all this went to lunch. That's scary. These are the might have heard, but we were just in court the other day. We're trying to buy a piece of property that sits right directly between the Wisconsin National Primate Research Center and the Harlowe Primate Psychology Lab. And it's our contention that if the public actually knew what was going on, if they could learn what was going on in the labs, that there might be an outcry. There certainly can't be an outcry about it. Their people can't write to their representatives, their congresspeople, if they don't know what's going on. And so it's our hope that if we could start an exhibition hall, if we could show using videos and photographs and scientific research and bring in speakers, that we could stimulate some sort of discussion about what was going on in those places. We have tons of photographs from inside the labs, oftentimes from pictures that they draw themselves. Now I'll get to one of those pictures in a second. We have tons of these kinds of pictures.
Are these pictures from here?
Some are, some aren't. In fact, none of these that I know are from here. The one on the bottom right is a picture very similar to the picture you see if you walk up to the front of the Harlowe laboratory, you have a picture of that. If you walk up to the front of the Harlowe laboratory, I urge everybody to do this, and look in the window, you'll see a picture of these isolated baby monkeys, and then a bronze plaque to Harlowe. This is one of the pictures from the Harlowe lab here. I'm sorry?
This is the McKinney.
That's one of the McKinney studies. Harlowe is important in a number of reasons. Not only was he one of the fathers of the entire primate research institution in the United States, he wrote one of the founding documents years and years ago, but he's also, he created more graduate students, more PhDs came out of the Harlowe lab than maybe out of anybody's lab. Many PhDs came out of Harlowe's lab, and those people have now traveled around the country and are now in positions of power around the country. Suomi's at the National Institute of Child Health and Human Development. His lab is actually in Poolsville in Washington, outside of Washington. Gene Sackett runs the infant primate laboratory at the Washington Primate Center. And there's a number of these people, and you can sort of, I've actually done this, but if you look at Harlowe's work, and you look at who his co-authors were, and you can just then start drawing lines out, and then they work with this person, and they're at this lab, it becomes sort of a mesh, sort of a web of this stuff going on, and it all really comes right back to Madison, Wisconsin. It's pretty interesting. Historically, Madison, Wisconsin is very important with regards to this particular problem we're talking about.
How do they put the numbers on? Are they random?
They're tattoos.
Tattoos.
Yeah, they're tattoos. All right. So we think we should acknowledge our close affinities and the ethical and moral implications of our shared world experiences. Monkeys and chimpanzees, when they're confronted with the same things that we are, they seem to act in very similar ways to us. We think that the most fundamental right of protection from us should be extended to chimpanzees and monkeys. We're not asking that they give the right to vote. We don't think they should have the right to drive cars. But we do think that they have the right not to be hurt by us in a willful way. You can make a difference. Join the Alliance for Animals. Get involved. Learn about what's going on right through your legislatures. And has, in fact, we have a number of brochures over here. This is Cole, another friend of mine. Just another one that isn't necessary. We do think that there's going to come a time, eventually down the road, that people are going to look back at these days and say, just as we are now concerned about what happened with the Jews in the concentration camps, what happened with the black during the Africans during the African slave days, we think that there's going to come a time that we'll look back at what's going on in the labs today. And far enough down the line, people are going to look back and think, how did people do those things? Why did people do those things? Why did other people allow those things to go on? When I was teaching 6th grade in Oregon, world history, and so when we would talk about all the things that went on, the Holocaust and slavery and the killing fields in Cambodia, all those sorts of things, my students always ask me, why did people let things like that go on? Now, who knows why they did? But one thing we always agreed on every year was that when we learned about people who actually took some risk, hid somebody in their basement, helped somebody get to freedom, that all of my students wanted to be one of those. They didn't want to be one of the people that were rounding people up. They recognized immediately who was on the right side and who was on the wrong side. This has been going on for a long, long time. This was a study in the mid-50s. And this is a study called the executive monkeys. And you often hear, right now, you hear stories about the research that we're doing on non-human primates is going to lead to advancements in human health care. The monkey on the left, I believe, was the executive monkey, and the monkey on the right was just along for the ride. And what they did was, see he's pressing a button there. There's a light that comes on. He has to press that button. And if he presses the button, neither one of the monkeys will receive an electric shock. And they do this, at this time, back in these days, you could leave these monkeys chaired, period. And so it was after, and I have a note on this, but I think it was after something around the neighborhood of about 20-something days of in this chair, having to press this thing so that they wouldn't become shocked. The executive monkey developed, he died. On autopsy, they found that he had developed a large abscess in his stomach, an ulcer, and it finally ruptured and he had died. And their claim is that this is about the same sort of place that humans get ulcers. And that this would be a model for inducing ulcers so that we could study ulcers. Now, we now know that ulcers are largely caused by a bacteria. It's a very slow-growing one called H. pylori. It had nothing to do with this sort of stress. This research turns out to be meaningless. And these monkeys were trapped in this sort of thing. Another one of my claims, this is Newsweek. It's the same magazine here. This is from 1971. And this goes sort of to the heart for why we think we should open an exhibition hall. In 1971, you could put images like this on the cover of a national magazine. Inside, you could show, it looks like an animal rights magazine, actually. There's pictures of, here's a cat with a bunch of stuff in his brain, being zapped and made to be anxious and angry. Another monkey with a thing, here's a rat. Just on and on. But today, here's Newsweek, that was 1971. This is Newsweek from 2004. So compare the difference. Here's this picture of this monkey being used in research, and here's this picture of this monkey being used in research. Now, this monkey is also in a chair. He also has things in his brain, but this is this is cropped in a much, this you open up and you're maybe not disturbed. It's a picture of a monkey getting a little drop of liquid. The message today is very, if you see it at all, this is pretty unusual, in fact, I had a picture like this today in one of these magazines. But it's very controlled. For people who know, you can see that he has a collar around his neck. So when they're moving him from the chair, in and out of the chair, they're using a pole because they put it on the end of him and then manhandle him into the cage and back into the chair. You can see this plastic thing here as part of the chair. But you don't see it as clearly as what you're seeing here. Today, the message, the information is very carefully moderated or massaged or tailored for human consumption.
What was the gist of that article? What was the point of it?
This one here, the new one. Well, the title of the thing is, it's something about understanding the brain. He's looking at pictures of other monkeys, and every time he, you can see this, it says, the implication is electrifying. The mathematically derived formula appears to be hardwired into the primate brain. Every time he answers the thing, he gets a little sip of liquid here. What's happening in most of the places whenever they do these sorts of studies is the monkeys are normally, they're fluid deprived or food deprived. They're not dying of thirst or dying of starvation, but they're very thirsty. And so when you put them in the chair, they're willing to do the little things that they've been trained to do because they're thirsty, so they'll get a squirt of the liquid. It's their motivation for working. And if you read these things, we're working the animals. So every month we meet on campus and we go over research that's going on. I urge you to stay informed, to find out, listen to our presentations. It's not just me that talks. I'm thinking that probably next month, the second Tuesday of September, we're going to have our speaker is going to be somebody that was previously working in the Harlowe laboratory. She'll talk about her experiences and share her ideas about things that should be done. I encourage you to come listen to her. Maybe I'm making all of this up. Yes?
So it's going to be the location?
Well, it's going to be one of the rooms at the, probably at the union event on the day. We'll move back on campus now that the students are back. This summer we've been traveling around all over the community, talking at libraries and community centers, getting people to come out. We flyer, we were handing out about 1,000 brochures every month.